Would you pray with me, please? Most holy and loving God, be that Spirit that draws us forth into your presence this evening. That extraordinary grace that falls upon us, that gently opens us up, reaches inside and plants seeds of your kingdom. Be that grace for us, we pray in your most holy name. Amen. Amen. You know, when I was growing up, when I was a youngster, I can remember all the pointless jokes that we used to tell. And in fact, when my nephew comes over, I dig them up and tell them again, because he's 11 now, so he's at that pointless joke age. But there are a few that stick in my head. I've kept the short ones for you. The first one was, what's white and swings through the jungle? A fridge. And the other one was, what's blue and swings through the jungle? A fridge wearing denim. And to say, you know, when you're 10 or 11, I think it's really funny. But of course, looking back now, I go, it's pointless. There's absolutely no reason to it. It makes no sense whatsoever. Which is a little bit like Ecclesiastes. From the Christian point of view, you read Ecclesiastes and you think, what is this about? This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So the question is, how come it got into the canon of books? How come it got into the Bible? Well, actually, one of the main reasons was that the book is purported to be written by King Solomon. So on the basis it was written by King Solomon, then it got into the canon of Scripture. Of course, at that point, nobody knew that actually it wasn't written by King Solomon at all. And the reason we know that is because it was probably written sometime about the 3rd century, whereas King Solomon lived about the 10th century. And the reason why we know that it was written about the 3rd century rather than the 10th century, if you're geeky like me, that is because language changes a lot. And the language that Ecclesiastes is written in is 3rd century language. Also, the references are 3rd century references. They're not 10th century references. It's a bit like somebody telling you that 50 Shades of Grey was written in the Middle Ages. You know, you'd look at it and you'd think, actually, no, because there's no these or thous or wilts. I can't believe I just said wilts. In 50 Shades of Grey, and also in the Middle Ages there were no cars, there were no office buildings, there were all the references that are in the book, they just didn't exist in the Middle Ages. And that's how we know that it was written today rather than 700 years ago. And in the same way, we know that Ecclesiastes was written around the 3rd century rather than the 10th century. So nothing to do with Solomon at all. However, once you realize when it was written, the book itself makes a bit more sense, because it's written during a period of Greek history, when Greece really did have a hold on a huge part of the world, and was certainly the center in terms of philosophy and in terms of thought. So the book, Ecclesiastes, looks at 2 Greek ways of thinking, 2 Greek philosophies that were really popular in the 3rd century. And the first one is Stoicism, and the second one is Epicureanism. So the Stoics and the Epicureans. And they actually, when you look at them, they look a bit similar, but they're poles apart. First of all, the Stoics believed that everything that happened in the world was fated. That there was nothing you could do about it, that fate had a hand in everything, so no matter what you did, it was fated to happen. Which meant that if good things happened to you, it was fate. If bad things happened to you, it was fate. So all you could do, really, was to kind of go along with it and remember that it's not your fault, that it's just fate. So the idea was that if you were a Stoic, then you tried not to get too emotionally involved with things, especially when things went wrong, because it wasn't your fault and you really couldn't do anything about it. It's where we get that kind of stiff upper lip from. It's the whole idea that, you know what, it's going to happen, it's happened. The only thing I can control is my emotions, so I'm just going to kind of deal with it, and I'm going to try and rise above it a little bit. So you have to put up with the good and you have to put up with the bad, and it all just happens for seemingly no reason whatsoever. And then there's the Epicureans, and the Epicureans believed that there was no fate, just chance. However, chance was in control. So whatever you did, there was a huge amount of chance involved. So you might, for example, work all your life towards a happy retirement, and then the day you retire, you drop dead. Ugh, well, that's just the way it goes. Or you might find that you burn all your bridges when you're young, and then you live until you're 90, and you've got nothing to live on. Oh, that's the way it goes. But it's all just kind of fate. So there was a group of Epicureans who really believed that, the only thing you can do then, if chance is what controls everything, then the only thing we can do is just enjoy life. And you have the birth of what was called hedonism. And hedonism was, eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we may die. It was all this, okay, you know what, we might just lose everything tomorrow, we might just die tomorrow, so today let's just enjoy life, let's just binge on everything. And that was kind of the far end of the Epicureanism. Also, it was kind of, there's no point in putting up with something you don't have to, because life's too short, let's just enjoy things. So obviously there's a lot more to these two philosophies than I've mentioned. But you can see that both of these are in the book of Ecclesiastes, where everything's vanity, it's all striving after the wind, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, you might as well be good, because it's good to be good, but then again, don't be too good, because you don't know what's going to happen when you die. It might be nothing, in which case you've wasted all that time doing good things, when you could have been enjoying doing some bad things. So do some bad things, but then again, be careful, because there might be a life after death, in which case you don't want to have done too many bad things, so don't be too bad, and try and put... This is kind of the book of Ecclesiastes. And there's a very famous set of verses in the book of Ecclesiastes that you will know, because they're used a lot at funerals, and that is, there's a time for everything, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to weep, a time to laugh. This is all about fate. It's all about, there's a time for everything, and everything just happens when it happens. So the book of Ecclesiastes is really interesting in terms of Greek philosophy. However, when you kind of look at that in terms of being Christian, where does it fit in? And how does it fit in with faith? Well, I think personally, and I could be wrong, I think it fits in two ways. The first is, if you're depressed, or you've ever suffered with depression, then I found Ecclesiastes to be a really helpful book. And the reason is because I found, suffering depression, that quite often people, and very well-meaning people, say the dumbest things. They say things like, oh, you know what, we all go through times like this. Like, no you don't. They say things like, look on the bright side. Oh, really? I've got a choice at this moment in time. Yeah. You have so much to live for. Why would you want to die? It's like, excuse me, because I'm suffering with depression. It's an illness. Just snap out of it. What's wrong with you? Shouldn't you be better by now? Things like, well, at least you've got, your husband, your dog, your nice flat, whatever it may be, and that should... It's not as bad as that. Or worse than that, have you taken your meds yet? Getting off those meds will help. That's another one. You know what? I've had a friend and they just got off their meds, and as soon as they stopped taking all the medication, they were fine. You just need to do that. Or somebody says, and I've been guilty of this in the past, I don't do it anymore, I know how you feel. I mean, seriously, really. And the whole, this will help, this is the cure. You know, this is what you need. And then Christians, we have a special set of ones that are really always guaranteed to make things worse. We say things like, God won't give you more than you can handle. I'm like, really? So my father committed suicide because he was just messing around, because he could have handled everything that he had. Whereas in reality, from my experience, people tend to commit suicide when their ability to cope is exceeded by the pain that they're feeling. Just give it all to God. Yeah, really. Trust in Jesus and it'll all be okay. Have faith. Count your blessings. Everything happens for a reason. Oh, I hate that one. Everything happens for a reason. Years ago, if you've ever been to my house, you'll have met Blinky, which is the neurotic cat. And when we first got her, she was just a kitten, about yay big. She was only 4 or 5 months old. And we took her to the vet to get her neutered, only to find out she was pregnant. So a couple of weeks later, she had 2 kittens, both of which were kind of deformed, you know, bad tails, broken tails, gimpy paws. I mean, they were lovely little kittens, and we found homes for them. But there was one inside her that couldn't get out. And I phoned a friend, somebody I knew in the congregation, who actually bred animals. And I phoned just to see if he had any advice about what I could do. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get through. And a couple of hours later, the poor little thing was stillborn. And I was so upset. I was just completely beside myself with this poor little thing. Anyway, the next morning, the phone goes, and it's the person I was trying to reach the previous night. And they said, "Oh, I saw you called. Can I help?" I said, "Actually, the reason I called was because this was happening. I thought you might have some advice, but you know, unfortunately, it's too late now. But thank you very much for calling." And he said, "Well, you know what? If this happens again," and I'm like, "Hang on, wait. If you're going to tell me I could have done something, can you wait a few days, please? Because I'm really upset right now, and I really don't want to hear it." He said, No. What I just want to say is that, you know, if God wants you to have 3 kittens, you'll have 3. And if God wants you to have 2 kittens, you'll have 2. And I'm like, so you're telling me my God kills kittens? Because I'm really not happy about that. And that really doesn't work for me. So, you know, sometimes just without thinking, trying to help, we say the dumbest things. We just don't think it through. So some of the things that you can say that I found do help are, you know, you're not alone in this. I'm in it with you. I may not be able to understand what you're going through right now, but I care about you, and I really want to be able to help if I can. You're important to me, and your life is important to me. Tell me what I can do right now to be able to help. And just have somebody sit in the middle of all that pain, just have somebody be with me and be able to sit and experience that with me is a real help. Because suddenly I feel like I'm not on my own and there's somebody else with me. Not trying to fix it, but just having the guts to be there in the middle of it all and experience it. And that's what I get from the book of Ecclesiastes. Because whoever wrote the book of Ecclesiastes was on a serious downer. Because when you read through the book, it just goes down and down and down and down and down. And whenever you think, you know what, there's a good little point, suddenly it flips over and it goes down again and down again and down again. And when I read it, I think, you know what, whoever wrote this was in a very similar situation to me almost 2,500 years ago. And has been through something really quite dramatic, and has been through loss, and has been through despair, and has been trying to work through this, and not found a way through. And in some ways that's really comforting. I know that sounds odd, but that's a real comfort. Secondly, I think the other thing that the book of Ecclesiastes does is that in a roundabout way it says, you know what? Don't underestimate the power of having a little religion in your life gives you. And the reason I think that is because if you go to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, which is the very last chapter, it starts with the words, "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before days of trouble come and the years draw near when you say, I will have no pleasure in them. And then he goes back on another downer. And if you read different translations, you'll find that that's translated in lots of different ways. And the reason it's translated in lots of different ways is that the word creator there is a bit of an anomaly. It's actually from the root Elohim, which is the word creator that we have in Genesis, when it says we created. And it's actually, it's God in the male sense, but it's also plural. So it means gods. And then what the writer does is the writer goes on to talk about some religious concepts. Some we'd be familiar with, and some you'd be familiar with if you were Jewish, and some you wouldn't be familiar with, but you would be familiar with if you were Greek. So, for example, the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the breath returns to God who gave it. That's very Jewish. That's kind of a very strong Israelite term. We find that in Genesis. But then before the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is broken and the pitcher is broken at the fountain. And that idea of the silver cord being snapped comes from Greek religious thought. And the idea was that your soul was up there somewhere and it was tied to you by a thin silver cord. And the fates would come along with a pair of scissors and snip it. And when it was snipped, that was it. That was your life over. And that's not a Jewish belief. That's very much a Greek belief. So one of the things that the writer's saying here is saying that one of the things that's really helpful is to be able to think outside of the philosophy. Because if all you do is think in terms of the philosophy itself, then actually it just kind of leads you down and down and down and down, and there's not much of a way out. I'm going to just take off those first two hymns, if that's all right. So I'll just flip the board. So, if I thought about this earlier, I could have got a clock, but I didn't. So, you must have seen this at some point. It's the nine dots. And the idea is that you need to be able to draw 4 lines that connect all the dots. If you've done it before, then it's probably quite easy. If you haven't done it before, then it's probably not. Because, and I remember doing this on some course at work at some point, and of course we all sat there for ages with drawing straight lines, because they've got to be straight lines, and drawing lines between 1, 2, 3, 4, and you need kind of 5 at least to be able to do it. Unless of course, you travel outside of this construct. So if you do that, then you can hit all of them with 4 straight lines. Now the interesting thing is that when I saw this done, the teacher said, you see, so what this proves is that you just need to be able to think outside of the box. Well, the thing is, a few years later, they did a study on this, and they found that even if they sat down with folks and said, you know what, you need to draw 4 straight lines, but you can go outside of that box, still only 20% of people got it, because actually it's really difficult. And the reality is that life is difficult enough without working out all of the stuff that's bigger than we are, the stuff that's spiritual, the stuff that's outside. So what we do is we construct religious constructs which then enable us to be able to connect with that which is larger than ourselves, that which grounds us in something which is beyond ourselves, which is what the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes is saying. He's saying, you know what, these philosophies are great. However, if you take them to a logical conclusion, then one of them leads to kind of the stiff upper lip and just putting up with something. The other one leads to hedonism. And actually, neither of them give you a really secure route. And the only way to get a secure route is to be a part of something larger than yourself, and it is actually to think about God. And that, I think, is a wonderful example of why it's important that we look after our spiritual lives. And because it's so difficult to do it on our own, it's so difficult to get it on our own, we have religion, which basically is being able to stand on the shoulders of others and use their experiences to be able to formulate systems which help us to examine the universe beyond the means that we're able to, and to be able to make some sense of that. So we're able to make some sense of Jesus because, not just because we're able to think outside of the box, but because we're able to stand on the shoulders of people like the Apostle Paul and all of the great spiritual leaders that have come since then, who then have made sense of it, and we then get to make sense of that. So the book of Ecclesiastes, on the one hand, if you're depressed, it's a really good book because it doesn't make you any happier. But reading it does give you this feeling of solidarity with the world. It does give you a feeling of solidarity with other people, that other people know and understand where you are because other people have been in similar places. And that, I think, is really, really useful. But also it reminds us that there's more to the world than philosophy. And there's more to the world than the stuff that we can just work out. That actually the universe is much vaster than we could appreciate, and our life is much more than the birth to death story that we see on Earth. And that actually we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves. And that something is awe-inspiring and helps us to make sense of who we are in ways that otherwise wouldn't. Amen.
Amen.